is a short demo to demonstrate the features of BW plugin for NetSuite. I will begin with the installation of NetSuite plugin on our BW 642 hotfix 4 home. This is the BW home that I am using for this demo. The NetSuite version that I'll be using is NetSuite 631 GA, which is the latest. Um, so you will be probably installing the plugin through update site. However, for the purposes of this demo, I have downloaded the P2 zip to my local system, and then I'll be installing the plugin through the P2 zip that I just downloaded to my system. I have already created a local update site with the P2 that I downloaded into my system. And just click on next. I'll accept to the license agreement. I'll click on finish, and I'll let the installation proceed. And this will probably take a few seconds. So what we are going to do is, after this is installed, we are going to go to the file system, and we're going to see what got installed, right? And I'm going to say yes for the Cloud Studio, sorry, the BW Studio to restart. Right. So I'm going to now choose a home where I have previously set up the NetSuite project, especially the example samples project, into my workspace. I'm just going to use that workspace for this demo. And while this BW Studio is loading, let's just quickly go to the file system and check what's there. As you can see, this is the installation location of NetSuite. And we have a bunch of folders that have been created. The thing that we need to look into for this demo is the Vistals folder. Our plugin pre-packages these folder versions, the Vistal versions from v2014_2 till v2017_2. And if you go to any one of these folders, you will find that we have both the Vistal as well as the schemas that is necessary to populate the input or output sections of our activities, depending on the categories that you choose in your configuration tab for the records. Now I'm going to go to the file system where I have installed NetSuite. Go to the samples folder, and this is the sample project which I'll be unzipping. I mean, if you can actually not, there's no need to unzip it, but I usually have this habit of unzipping this zip and then loading the application from the VW Studio, not as a zip. So we have the application, the samples application loaded into our workspace. We will allow the Eclipse to build the workspace, sorry, the BW Studio to build the workspace. And then we're going to go and first look at the shared resource and walk through the fields of the shared resource. So the login email ID and the login password will be unique to your NetSuite account. Um, and then we have something called the login account, the endpoint version. Once again, the endpoint version that you see here, um, that points to the list of all Vistals versions that you have in your installation location. I'm sorry, this is the, I have lots of commands open. So the values that you see in the endpoint version dropdown corresponds to the endpoints that is present in your installation location. And we provide two types of authentication mechanisms. One is using user credentials, the other one is using token-based authentication. So you can read up about token-based authentication on the NetSuite documentation, which NetSuite provides. Um, Assuming that you are aware of the NetSuite authentication types, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the user credentials. For user credentials, we have two fields that you will need to fill in: the login role and the application ID. And if it is token-based authentication, it's consumer key, consumer secret, token ID, and token secret. What you can do is you can actually create a new module property for your login email. I'm going to use TIBCO's account for the purposes of this demo. So this will be your uh, NetSuite account information, and that will be punching in over here. Right. So if you know the NetSuite account, NS account details, you can type in your NS account directly over here. However, if you're not sure, then I would recommend that you make it a literal value. Make the login role as a recommended value. And then if you click on retrieve account information, this is now going to automatically fill in the login account and login role by making a call to the backend. Right? As you can see, we have a drop-down for the login accounts. And each and every login account will have one or more login roles associated with it. For this demo, I'll use the login account that I'm familiar with, and I'll be using the administrator login role. And for the application ID, excuse me for a moment while I go retrieve the application ID for this account, right? I have retrieved the application ID associated with this account. So the application ID is something that you would be creating or in the backend of NetSuite. Um, when I open the NetSuite backend page, I can probably show you how to create this application ID. But for now, I just click on test connection. And you can see the test connection is successful. Um, Authentication type, if you change it to token based, the application ID and login role goes away. And as I mentioned before, you will need to punch in the token ID, token secret, client ID, and client secret. I'm not going to go into those details now. Since the connection is successful, I'll try to run one process first. It is not necessary that you will need to change these details, but in our system, it could very well be that in our NetSuite backend system, it could very well be that there are accounts or records with these names already existing. So I don't want to get an error from the backend saying duplicate record. So I'm just changing it beforehand. But it's not necessary that you will need to do this as well. So before I run this, I just want to quickly show you the list of all activities that our plugin supports. Um, the name of the activity would correspond to the endpoint that we're trying to hit to achieve our use cases. One is the add record. As you know, it adds a record to a record type. Update record, it would update a record that already exists. Get record will retrieve one particular record, and delete record will um, delete that one particular record, which is identified by the external ID or the internal ID. If we give both an external ID as well as an internal ID, then the plugin will choose the internal ID. And we have something called the get all. Get all, right now it only supports one category of NetSuite record types. It would retrieve all the records. Saved search. As you know, in NetSuite, you can create searches and save them for uh, recurring calls for the same search. And you can fetch those saved searches depending upon the category, subcategory, and the record, actually the record type. And once you retrieve the saved search, you can run them. And with the loop around this activity, you could have guessed that we support pagination as well. And this is a search record. The search record would search for a particular one or more records belonging to a record type. And as you can see here, there is also this option to control the page size. And the search category, the search criteria is something that you will enter in the input tab. If you know these details, that is. If you don't give any search record criteria, then it would fetch all the records. And then we also have an upsert activity, which will create if that record by that name does not exist, and it will update if that record by that name already exists. It will just blindly replace whatever is already available. And then this is the record listener. We'll talk about this a bit later. First, let's try to run the update get record activity. Oh, sorry, add update get delete.bwp. So if you just run like the way I did, you will probably be seeing an error that's associated with an HTTP connector shared resource. That is because the NetSuite record listener activity uses a HTTP connector share resource for providing the HTTP service capabilities. But that will not stop the real process that you're trying to run from moving forward. If you do not want to see this error, you just need to go to the HTTP connector resource and give a host and a port with which you can bind your local system to, or the system on which you're running your BW process to. We'll now wait for all the 4 activities to finish execution before we go in and look at the output of each of these activities. As you can see, this result is an array. The status is success. The status detail is, well, okay, let me get it back again, the view. This is the internal ID of the newly added record. The external ID is whatever we supplied. The type of the record is calendar event. Next, we move on to the update record. Success is true. Once again, the result here is an array. And it has successfully updated what those fields that we try to update in the input. And let's see what's the output of the get. Once again, the result here is an array. I'll come to what this array is in a moment. And this is the details of the record. So as you can see, we updated the title in the update record activity, and this is shown in the get record activity. And it has also successfully deleted the record. So I'm going to stop this process, and I'll talk a bit about the arrays that I was talking to you about. So it is possible to create more than one record. It is possible to update more than one record, and the get will return more than one record. And it is also possible to delete more than one record in one single flow. The way you do it is, assuming there is a data source from which you want to map and create as necessary, you would just, if you're doing it manually, you would say duplicate. But if you are mapping it from an external data source, you'd use a for each loop. For each item coming in from the external data source, you'll be creating a record, complex element, right? Similarly, for update, as you can see, update uses the for each for demonstration purposes. Assuming that the NetSuite add record was returning more than one result, we just mapped from this result to this record in a for each loop, and for each record that got added, we'll be updating that particular record. And in case of the get record, the for each is done on the base ref. That is, for each record that got updated what is the external ID or the internal ID, and then it will get the details of that particular record. So that's why this result is uh, 0 remaining. Similarly, the case for delete record, you would map from the get record, and for each record that we get, we would provide the internal ID or the external ID or both, and then delete that particular record. And similarly, the result here is 0 to many, and for each record that we try to delete, we'll get a success or failure status. And the base ref that would correspond to whatever you fed in the input. And finally, the type identifies the type of the record that we are trying to delete. Okay, now let's move on to upsert. So the reason why we have a loop around the upsert is that we're going to repeat this same activity twice. The very first time it runs, it is going to create a new record. And the second time it runs, it's going to replace that record. Once again, to avoid a duplicate record error, I'm just modifying it, but you don't need to modify this. I'm going to run that particular upsert and delete process. The process appears to be taking time, not because our plugin is slow, it's because I'm situated or located away from the server where the NetSuite is running. We'll wait for this activity to complete, sorry, the process to complete, and then we'll be checking the output. As you can see, the first upsert is success is true, and in case of second upsert, it's true again. However, it may not be possible to check whether it did an update or a create by just looking at the activities output, that particular activities output. You can have a get and look at the created modified time to be sure. And the base ref, sorry, the delete record activity did a job as well. So now, in order to get rid of those, get rid of that annoying error every time you start the process, let's try to use BW localhost property. I just typed in localhost and then make it a literal value. So, yeah. Now let's just run the search paging. I'm not going to modify anything in search paging. I'm just going to run this one. As you can see, this loop will run multiple times. The loop condition will be given in the repeats. You can find that in the repeats property tab, which we'll get to in a bit. Okay, looks like this is done. No, still going on. No. So total records for the record category that we chose was 106. Sorry, record type that we chose was 106. The page size that we mentioned in the general tab was 10. So if you do the math, the total number of pages will come to 11. And once the page index reaches 11, the loop will exit. And since we have mentioned to accumulate the output, you can find the output which will contain all the uh, so which will contain all the output in the all the output that has been accumulated so far will be made available in the output of accumulate. Right, so let's look at the exit condition for this repeat. If the index is greater than total pages, then this loop will terminate. And similarly, we have a loop of pagination around invoke save search. I'm not going to run this process. However, it's important that I talk about the configuration for this invoke save search. If you run the activity as it is, then you will you will be seeing errors. That's because your NetSuite backend may or may not have the saved search by this name. So it's important to click on the fetch save searches, then wait for this drop down to populate. Our code is actually making a backend call to retrieve the saved search for this record type. Listen accounting. You can choose whatever you want to run, and you may or may not give criteria and the columns to be retrieved. And if you want to join, you can join as well. But if you don't want to give anything, you can just run the process as it is, and you will probably be getting a valid output. So get all is fairly simple to run. You should just be able to run it. Okay. So let's look at the general tab of NetSuite add record activity. So we have something called record category, subcategory, and record, right? So what are they? How did we come about this classification? Well, it loosely corresponds to the menu that you would see after you log into your NetSuite account. So bear with me for a minute, for a few moments, where I retrieve my NetSuite background account so that I can relate to what is seen in the activities UI. Okay, so this is the top level menu items that we see after we log into the backend. Activities, transactions, lists, documents, setup, customization, and some other stuff. If we go to our NetSuite BW plugin activity for add and look at the category, you'll see activities, documents, lists, setup, and transactions. And those that we could not categorize, we have put it under general, right? And what is the subcategory? Under activities, we have scheduling, right? And just for the purpose of this demo, let me just modify it to something else. Let me click on lists. So for under list category, we have accounting, employees, marketing, relationships, supply chain, support. If I click on employees, you see employee, HCM, job, and payroll item, right? So if I click on list, and all those things that we just saw in the subcategory that were in our activities subcategory drop down. If I expand on employees, payroll items, employees, work calendars. And in case you're wondering where this record is coming from, this is actually coming from XSTs. This is not something that we type in, but it's coming from the schemas themselves, the NetSuite provided schemas. And if you're unsure about where to find the web page for a particular record type, go to the website search bar and then start typing whatever you want to search. If you don't find, uh, let me just click on something else. Payroll item. Payroll items. You'll be led to the payroll items, and if you add your record, you can go here and search for whatever you have added. Okay, and the internal IDs can be found here, right? So that was just a little bit about the backend and how we came about these fields that you see in the UI category, subcategory. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, our plugin already packages the supported NetSuite Visual versions. However, if you for some reason you want to re-download or unsatisfied or unsatisfied, not the right term, or if you want to use some other version like some beta version, you can actually use the get Visual schema and punch in the URL for downloading the schema, Visual schema. And what would happen is if the version is already present in the NetSuite home, it would go to that particular location and replace that Visual version. Or if it is not there, it is going to create a new folder in your NetSuite installation location with that particular version number. Right. So uh, let me just go back to the connection and talk a bit about session count. So our plugin supports concurrent invocation of NetSuite uh, backend, and you can control the number of parallel sessions that can be maintained at any given time by entering that value in the field for session count. Um, Say, for example, if the license that you have with NetSuite allows only like 10 concurrent sessions, and if you give 12 as the session count over here, there will be higher probability that you will run into concurrency issues. In order to avoid that, you can spread across the session count across as many number of shared resources you might have for NetSuite in your application. Okay. Also, our plugin supports retries. Um, Retry, even though the fields are not available in the UI, you can control the retry mechanism. Let me just pull up the docs for NetSuite. Oh, this documentation is pretty good, and the samples is also pretty well explained. You can find all the uh, features of a plugin in this documentation. So these are all the properties that you will need to set for achieving retries. If you're running it from BW Studio, you need to enter these VM arguments in your debug configurations. Please note that the regex is not supported. So what is this regex? If the incoming SOAP error message matches the value that is present in this regex, retry would happen. If not, it for any other error, it is not going to happen. At runtime, this is you might want to enter these properties in bw comment.tra file, right? You can control the number of retries, the retry interval, the retry regex, against which you would want to validate the incoming error message so that you want the retry to go ahead. You can find the retry value from the log file that is created by the NetSuite server response, or you can find it from the NetSuite exception output. So that is one bit about retries. Right. Our plugin also supports custom records, custom lists, and custom fields. And it's supported across many activities. So to know exactly what are all the activities that support or do not support custom lists, I would custom lists, custom records, and custom fields, I would recommend that you read this section on customization, where if you have clearly spelled out what are the records that support custom field, for example, what are the records that support custom record, for example. Yeah. Sorry, what are the activities that support the custom record, for example? What are the activities that support the custom list? I have pre-configured a process or a BW application uh, with uh, support for adding custom records and custom fields within that record. So to deal with custom record, you will need to choose setup, category as setup, subcategory as customization, and a record as custom record. Right. So now in the record type, this is where you would enter the internal ID of the custom record that you have given or that you have created in your backend. And then in the custom field list, I have, for the custom record that we have in our backend, I have created a a Boolean field, and I mentioned the internal ID for that field along with the value, whether it's true or false, right? And the update and the get record is going to also deal with the custom record. So let me run this once, and you can find that the get record would also have retrieved the custom fields that we created. I'm just going to make sure that the test connection can be successful before I run this. Right. So since this is done now, let's just take a look at the output of each of these activities that just run. So the add was a success. Let's look at the output of get and see if the custom records were retrieved or not. See, yeah, there's the custom fields. My bad, sorry. As you can see, the custom field has also been retrieved. So this shows that our plugin can support customizations to NetSuite backend. So we have, let's just recap what we just saw. We saw all the active non-listener activities that is present in NetSuite. Um, Add, update, get, delete, get all, invoke, save, search, upsert, and delete. Right. We also went through the shared resources details, and we also talked about the retry support that we have in our plugin. Now, let's move on to the record listener. Briefly, I will set up the record listener on my machine for the demo purposes. So before going to record listener, there is one more uh, feature of our plugin that I want to talk about. That is setting the proxy. Our plugin supports proxy at design time as well as runtime. The proxy fields are not available in the UI of the activities or the shared resource. However, you can set them in the way that is described in this section over here. It's pretty straightforward. It's very similar to how you would set up the retry properties. The setting property at design time and setting property at runtime. In You may not be running it in from studio, so you'll be using the T for a deployer. So you will need to enter these properties in bw comment.tra file. As you can see, you have to enter the host of your proxy, port. We also support authentication, so username and password, and also the timeout for the proxy connection. Okay. Now let's move on to the record listener part. Preparing to use the record listener activity. In your installation location, you should be seeing a folder called suite script. And inside the suite script, you'll have an XML file and a JavaScript file. Right? Just keep this in the back of your mind. We'll reach to these two files shortly. So we have provided a step-by-step guide on how to use NetSuite record listener activity. First of all, for the record listener activity to work fine, the BW application containing the NetSuite record listener activity has to be deployed in a DMZ machine, which is accessible from from the internet. That is, if your server is running behind a firewall of your organization, it won't be visible to the users of internet. So you will need to deploy this on a DMZ machine. So if you remember, we saw two files in the folder called source script in your NetSuite installation location directory. The first one is record listener http config.xml file. The details of these files are that it contains these parameters that you will need to set. One is the HTTP server, the other is the HTTP port, the HTTP path, listener username, listener password, retries, retry interval, use SSL, is it enabled or disabled. So this HTTP server is the public IP address of your DMZ machine. And the HTTP port, or it need not be an IP address. If it is it can also be a public FQDN, but it has to be resolvable by DNS servers that are available in the internet. So the HTTP port is whatever you give in the HTTP connector share resource. The HTTP path is something that you will be entering or configuring in your NetSuite record listener activities general tab. That's the same HTTP path that you'll need to give here. We are also providing basic auth, so you can enter username and password for sending in the information from the backend. And this is the retry mechanism that we are providing for the listener. And use SSL, whether or not the server has SSL certificate enabled. If you are first testing this, you may not have a SSL server. Sorry, SSL certificate. So you would say use SSL as false. But if you move it to production or hosting it on an Amazon EC2 machine, which is running behind an elastic load balancer that has a publicly signed CS certificate, then you would say use SSL as true. Right. Now, the second step is to upload the configuration files to the NetSuite website. Let me quickly open up the DMZ machine that we have, that we use for our listener testing. So as you can see, I already have set up the NetSuite record listener here in this machine. Let's go through the general tab of this record listener activity. You will still need to specify a connection resource. Why is this important? Is because um, you will want to specify the category, subcategory, and record that you will be listening in on. So any one record listener can listen to only one type of record, but the events on that record can be create, edit, delete, or all of them, or a few of them. And in HTTP connection, you'd be asked to create or choose an HTTP share resource. And if you go to the HTTP share resource, the host that I've given in this is the local IP address of this machine, DMZ machine, but this is not the public DNS. Sorry, public IP address. The port is 7093. This can be anything, any available port on your server that's running on the DMZ. And so we are going to listen to any create, edit, delete events happening on phone call record type. And remember the relative path that we spoke about? And the relative path that's being currently used here is the NetSuite servlet. And the username is admin and the password is admin. So this is a little bit about the uh, NetSuite record listener configuration. I'm going to start this application. If you started in a debug mode with debug logs for NetSuite record listener enabled, then you can actually see the IP address on which, or the URL of the record listener. However, when you're actually trying to see whether or not the port is up and running, you may want to use the public IP address instead of the private IP address that we mentioned in the HTTP connector share resource. Do note that if you try to enter the public IP address in the HTTP connector shared resources host field, you'd get a binding exception because the local the machine's IP configuration is not aware of its external IP address. So let me just try to run this guy. It says only accept posts, which means, so this is the public IP address of the machine, of the DMZ machine that I'm currently showing the demo. Right. Now you have to log on to the NetSuite website as an administrator. Then comes the part where you will need to upload a few files, and the location is specified here: documents, files, and suite scripts. So you go to let me log in again. Documents, files, suite scripts. Okay, let me see if I can bring this docs over there in my remote machine, so I don't need to switch back and forth between my remote machine and my host machine. All right. Oops. Okay, here it is. So the scrolling is a bit weird because for some reason the connectivity to the remote machine is kind of slow. So bear with us. Yep. Point number two, C. We went to, we finished point number two. We went to documents, files, and source scripts, and we have to do point number C. Create a new folder named TIBCO NetSuite event source in source script folder, and then you will have to upload the XML file, which is one of the two files that you can find in the source scripts folder, to source scripts TIBCO NetSuite event source directory / environment. So what is this environment? It's production, staging, or testing. And it has to be, oh, I forgot about the company ID. So I will just open up that particular location. So I already have created TIBCO NetSuite event source, and within that, this is the production, which in this doc corresponds to the environment. So environment here is production, and within that, there are two folders. They correspond to the company IDs for this current account using which I have logged in. So let's look at 1425075 and look at the record listener http config.xml. As you can see here, the http server is 1356.40.182, which is the external IP address of my DMZ. This is the port that I have configured in the share resource of http connection. That is over here. Oh, http connector share resource 7093. Username is admin, the password is admin because that's what I've configured in the activity. Use SSL is false because the DMZ is not running behind an elastic load balancer that has a publicly signed CA. So if I give true here, then the NetSuite backend, while it is sending out the event source, may not be able to do a successful SSL handshake. So that's why it's given as false here, and it is enabled, right? So once you're done with this step, so this section HTTP server configuration basically goes over all the fields that you can see in the XML file. We'll skip that, but you can read through it if you want more clarification. Oh yes, there is something else. The HTTP path here is an empty XML element. That's because the listener code that's running in NetSuite, it automatically appends NetSuite servlet. So to the URL that is formed while sending out the event source information. So if the relative path that you're using is NetSuite servlet, exactly NetSuite servlet, then there's no need to specify the relative path or HTTP path in your XML. However, if the relative path is NetSuite servlet / something else, say ABC, then you will need to enter the ABC portion over here in the HTTP path. That is, if it is something like /abcd, then in the HTTP path, you'll need to say HTTP abcd over here as an example, right? Let's move on to the next section in listener configuration. Running user event script in NetSuite. If you remember, there was another JavaScript file that came with the installation location. that is TIBCO user event or JavaScript, right? So you would want to upload the JavaScript file without any modifications um, to the same location where you have uploaded the XML file for the XML file that we just saw. Once you have done that, you can find it over here. So a few tricks: if you do not want to create the folder called TIBCO NetSuite event source, and if we do not want to uh, have an environment variable, so this environment is actually the environment of NetSuite, so it's not the literal string environment. And similarly, the company ID is not the literal string company ID, is the account information that your that your login email has. So you can choose to remove this folder structure if you want to have the XML file as well as the um, JavaScript file at the very at the root of such scripts. But if you want to have this level of categorization for testing your listener across various environments, then this is the best approach. That is to create a folder called production, and within that specify the and specify the not account ID, sorry, company ID. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for, company ID. Okay, still waiting for the page to scroll down. All right. Okay, this is too much scrolling. Right. So we will need to create new script with whatever we have uploaded. So you go to customizations, scripting, and scripts. Then you would ideally click on new. Since I've already created the scripts, um, we can just view them. I mean, if you want to create a new script, just follow the definitions given from point number 3 to 11 and you're good to go. It's actually very straightforward. The important thing here to note is the deployment, where you mention that you want to listen to phone call record type and you want to listen to the event type delete, and the log level is debug. And then you also have an option to look at the execution log, right? So now let's try to delete a phone call record. So the deletion from the backend is successful. And if we go to the BW application running on your DMZ, you would see that a new job has been created. The details can be seen here. So we deleted a phone call, and the username that deleted is Alex Wolf. That's the login using which I deleted right here. Right. The email address that was used is the one that I logged in with. and this is the record data. As you can see, the user company ID is this guy, whatever you see on the screen. And this is the same company ID that you would be using in the folder structure that you create. Right. So what is the relevance of the folder structures that you created? If you do not want to listen in on any changes done to company IDs that is different than this one, which is just pure noise as far as your listener is concerned, then you can filter it out by creating that particular folder structure that I was talking to you about. If you do not create that, then you will receive notifications for all deletes of that particular record type across all companies that your user would belong to, right? So this is just a quick demo regarding record listener. There are a couple of other small but useful features that are available in record listener. So waiting for the tab to switch back to PDF. Enumeration configuration. There will be certain fields that are enumerations, and if you want to make sure that the uh, data coming in from the backend matches with that of the enumeration that is mentioned in the XSD file for that record type, then you will need to set this property to true. So if the backend data comes with a value that is defined in the XSD files, then our plugin will throw an exception. For example, let me just locate a enum field over here. Okay, I'm not able to locate it right now, but if the record type has an enum field, and if you want to make sure that whoever is sending you the information sends a value that can be acceptable, then you'll need to turn on this field for validating the enum field. And then we also have this option of checking the host name. This to ensure that the data that is being sent to you by the NetSuite backend is actually coming from the NetSuite backend. So if you give this property in your runtime, then it would try to match the host name of the incoming HTTP request that is carrying the event listener data against any one among the comma separated values that you specify for this property. And that's it about checking the host name. Right. And if you want to know the complete set of features, please go through this documentation. That's actually pretty useful. And as far as this demo is concerned, we have actually covered as much as possible, including the record listener. Yeah. Thank you.